Good evening, and welcome to our Wednesday night study. Before I start in the news, and I'll probably do this again before we get to our study itself, I just want to announce that and remind you that on this coming Sunday, the 19th, I'll be preaching the 11 o'clock service at the Healing Place in Trustville. So we want you to join us if you possibly can. Let me get a little bit in the news this week. Some of you have watched the Super Bowl. AOC has criticized this Christian Super Bowl ads. It says Jesus would not fund commercials to make fascism look benign. I don't even know what that means, to be honest with you, other than she's anti-Christian. Christian group He Gets Us reportedly spent $20 million on 2 Super Bowl advertisements. And if you saw those, they were pretty powerful. But Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez said Sunday she did not believe Jesus would support Super Bowl commercials and claimed that it makes fascism look benign. The Christian group He Gets Us reportedly spent $20 million on 2 Super Bowl advertisements that showed Jesus as someone with empathy for immigrants and the poor, who was also tired of the divisions of politics. One of He Gets Us spots that aired Sunday night started with a black and white image apparently showing a man shouting at a police officer in riot gear. Other images of unrest then appeared, followed by the line on screen, "Jesus loved the people that we hate." The advertising campaign is funded in part by family behind Hobby Lobby, as well as Christian groups and other anonymous donors. The ads were an effort to spread the message of Jesus to the LGBTQ plus people and other communities that have often felt unwelcome to Christianity. A previous He Gets Us spot showed a sideshow of black and white images of migrants fleeing their homes to avoid persecution. The ad revealed that the story is actually about Jesus, his mother, Mary, and her husband, Joseph. AOC doesn't need to really say anything about anything. I'm not even sure why she has a platform. The He Gets Us campaign was launched in March of 2022. It plans to spend $2 billion over the next several years. The ads direct viewers to a website that includes Bible readings, methods to chat with real people about religion, and information about Jesus. And again, AOC, I don't even know why they give her any time. Her opinion means as much to me as a pile of dirt outside, and hopefully it does to you too. Let me tell you something that's really revolutionary that's probably going to miss all the news outlets this week. It's this little stele or stone. King David's name has been uncovered in a 2,900-year-old stone slab. Now let me tell you why that's so important. The 2,900-year-old basalt stone slab contains an extra biblical reference to King David in support of him being an actual historical figure, according to scholars writing in the latest edition of Biblical Archaeology Review. Let me tell you why this is so important. I was a member of Biblical Archaeology Review and still am, and basically they don't believe that there ever was a David. They think his name means love, but they don't have any proof archaeologically that David existed. So for decades, hundreds of years, they said there was no such thing as David. It was an allegory. Well, this week we found proof that David existed and that he was a king. The Bible is always accurate. Science has a lot to catch up to it, but it's always accurate. If you go a little bit further, and I bring you into the category of war, it doesn't look really good on the world front. 2023, the year of conflict. Russia and China are mobilizing. Why are China and Russia both suddenly so concerned about mobilizing their troops? What we're witnessing right now is unlike anything we have seen since World War II. The Russians are mobilizing hundreds of thousands of fresh troops as they prepare for a new offensive in Ukraine. And meanwhile, NATO countries are getting ready to send heavy tanks to the Ukrainians for the first time since the war started. But why have the Chinese decided that a nationwide mobilization may soon be necessary? Is China expecting a war? It is being reported that anyone in China that is 18 years or older could potentially be subject to mobilization under a brand new law which will go into effect next month. The Chinese are laying the groundwork for a massive nationwide mobilization of young people. But why would they need to do that? Nobody's going to invade China, so why would they be going to war? Needless to say, the answer is obvious. The moment that an intrusion or an invasion of Taiwan begins, the United States and China will be in a state of war. Taiwan is one of our allies. And that will mean that the flow of goods from China will immediately stop for America. Most Americans simply don't understand what that would mean. For example, our healthcare industry would instantly be thrown into a state of complete and utter chaos. A terrifying percentage of America's active pharmaceutical ingredients are made in China. That includes 95% of imports of ibuprofen, 70% of acetaminophen, and up to 45% of the imported penicillin supply. So what would happen if China simply turned off that supply? And by the way, they could. There are thousands upon thousands of other things that are manufactured in China that Americans use on a daily basis that we wouldn't be able to get anymore. In other words, we would be in a world of hurt. And once Taiwan is under attack, the factories that are located there wouldn't be able to supply us with any more microchips. And that would deeply affect every single industry in our entire country. A Chinese invasion would threaten American supply of semiconductors, which are needed to run everything from cars to refrigerators. If China invades Taiwan, it will truly be a nightmare scenario for the entire globe. So our leaders should be doing all they can to find a peaceful solution. But now the Chinese spy balloon saga has our leaders in Washington angrier with the Chinese than ever. Elsewhere, the Russians in Ukraine are continuing to invade the Ukraine. Ukraine Defense Minister Oleksiy Rezunov says Russia has mobilized, quote, much more than 300,000 troops, perhaps up to 500,000. And these are pouring into Ukraine in preparation for what is expected to be a major offensive in the coming days and weeks. Putin's war stocks are vast, and his factories have been pushing out and working around the clock to churn out even more and more military supplies. After months of telling us that Ukraine is winning, even publications such as the Wall Street Journal are now being forced to admit that the Russians are on the move on 5 fronts in the eastern districts and regions of Ukraine. The Russians can see the writing on the wall, so they are starting to fix up bomb shelters all over their nation. That should have our antennas going up. Many of Russia's thousands of bunkers, reinforced cellars, and other safe hideouts have been mothballed for decades since the Cold War. But as the war in Ukraine drags on, local authorities appear to be spending hundreds of millions of rubles to again make them fit for habitation. The Russians have thousands upon thousands of bomb shelters that could be used in the event of a nuclear war. So what do we have for our citizens? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. The Daily Mail just reported that an article, would your neighborhood be targeted in a nuclear conflict? The official map shows 2,000 locations across the U.S. that are at risk. Thanks to our very foolish leaders, we could soon find ourselves fighting Russia and China simultaneously. A war we would never win. Sadly, most Americans have absolutely no idea that we are racing towards oblivion. Most people just assume that our leaders know exactly what they are doing and that they have everything under control. Unfortunately, the truth is they have no idea what they're doing, and I believe that this will become exceedingly clear as 2023 rolls around. On a similar article, this says China surpasses the United States in nuclear missile launchers. The U.S. unprepared to deter the threat. As China emerges in a rapid nuclear buildup as part of its strategy to achieve global dominance, the Pentagon announced yesterday that the communist nation has surpassed the United States in the number of intercontinental ballistic missile launchers that it has. The U.S. nuclear force was designed over a decade ago, primarily to deter Russia, not just both Russia and China. While the U.S. is modernizing its nuclear capabilities, it is not to the scale we need to deter this growing threat. As the former commander of U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, Admiral Harry Harris, testified before Congress just this week, China's dream of national rejuvenation by 2049 will be enhanced by their nuclear capability, he said. In addition to this massive expansion of its ICBM force, China is cracking out nuclear warheads one after another and has completed a nuclear triad of land, air, and sea nuclear capabilities with the deployment of a strategic bomber. It has also tested technologies previously unknown to Russian and U.S. arsenals, like a fractional orbiting bombardment system, which can circle the globe before releasing a nuclear missile or a hypersonic trajectory. So if you want to know what that balloon was about, and the other balloons that we've been seeing are actually objects, they won't tell us, China's testing our defenses. They're testing our capability of picking something up. If a balloon carried a limited nuclear weapon and is exploded at 60,000 feet, it would put America and North America it would throw us back to the 1800s, as I told you before. An EMP, electromagnetic pulse, would knock out everything we know that runs on electricity, your cars, your refrigerators, everything. And basically, we would be back to the 1800s. For these reasons, the former commander of the U.S. Strategic Command, Admiral Charles Richards, stated, as I assess our level of deterrence against China, the ship is slowly sinking. He's speaking about America. Given the speed of China's nuclear buildup, he's probably right. If China has moved this quickly in such short of time, the U.S. should prepare for an even greater expansion in the years to come. The U.S. needs to wake up to this growing reality for which it is woefully unprepared. It is well past time the U.S. make plans to strengthen its nuclear forces to bolster deterrence of the growing Chinese threat. These efforts should include increasing the overall size of the U.S. nuclear arsenal and fielding additional capabilities like the nuclear-armed sea-launched cruise missile. Only as a deterrent. America is not going to use that, but we need to have it as a deterrent. Israel has had a nuclear weapon since the early 1980s and has been a deterrent to all of their aggressive Arab nations that are around them. America must be prepared to meet the challenge. As we continue to talk to you about China, and again, for most Americans, this is not on your radar. We're not told anything about this. Matter of fact, we're not told about it on CNN or NBC or ABC. No one's talking about it. Americans are notorious for reacting after a crisis. And trust me, everyone that I'm reading about is talking about a crisis with China. The U.S. reliance on Chinese strategic resources sets the stage for a war disaster, this article says. Imagine what Joe Biden, our future president of the United States, would do if a Chinese dictator, Xi Jinping, dispatched another spy balloon toward America and declared, if America destroys our peace-loving balloon, we will have no choice but to suspend immediately until further notice all U.S.-bound exports of Chinese-made antibiotics and antibiotic precursor chemicals. We eagerly await the White House's response. That chilling hypothetical and last week's all-too-real spy balloon fiasco should make it excruciatingly clear that America urgently needs to repatriate critical industries from China back to the United States of America. Let me give you a brief history. President Clinton opened up China to all kinds of businesses from the United States. Industries and big tech was all too happy to go to China where their wages are a lot lower so they can make that profit, that greed. And in so doing, they've built up the infrastructure of China and have allowed America to become dependent on Chinese products, including our medical supplies. The only president that would put the brakes to China was a man by the name of Donald Trump, who was giving incentives for industries to come back to America. You remember the whole slogan about Made in America. He knew what he was doing. China has a throat hold on us. And if China ever wants to stop the flow, we are going to be in a world of hurt. If, God forbid, the Chinese Communist Party attacked Taiwan, it's hard to imagine that Beijing would not use antibiotics and other vital drugs to extort U.S. neutrality while China conquers and communizes that nation. America could face this rotten choice: defend Taiwan before long, America could face this rotten choice: defend Taiwan and, before long, watch helplessly as strep throat, gonorrhea, meningitis, and other bacterial infections go untreated, perhaps fatally so, or keep the life-sustaining antibiotics flowing as Beijing strangles Taipei. Letting the Chinese Communist Party crush its island neighbor would trample the Taiwanese Relations Act, America's de facto commitment to the integrity of that prosperous, free market constitutional republic. American military and diplomatic prestige would plunge even as atrocities and bloodshed in Taiwan soared. Congress should pass and Biden should sign robust incentives to entice U.S. pharmaceutical, strategic mineral, and other concerns in China to come home. Specifically, eligible companies that repatriate their operations should face a federal corporate tax rate of 0% for the first 5 years after they leave the communist China and return to the land of the brave. We need to bring our companies back home. We need to be dependent on American products, not Chinese. We are playing a dangerous game of Russian and Chinese roulette. This massive shot in the arm will help lure these organizations back to the United States to erect U.S. facilities, employ American workers, etc. Similar incentives should be available to domestic startups and business expansions in this life and death sector. In Tuesday's State of the Union address, Biden touted tax credits for the purchase of electrical vehicles. California, Oregon, and Washington have banned sales of new gasoline-powered cars as early as 2035. If this seems comfortably distant, 2035 is nearer into the future than 2008 financial meltdown was in the past. If the left insists on EVs, then why are they making it harder to build them? You heard me, right? Joe Biden banned mining in 225,000 acres of Minnesota's Iron Range, and he locked up the development of taconite, copper, nickel, cobalt, platinum grouped elements, and more. Democrats blocked the Twin Metals mine, home to 34% of the United States copper, 89% of the United States cobalt, 95% of domestic nickel reserves. If Democrats shutter domestic sources for EV component materials, where else would they be? Well, you got it right, China. We have the elements to actually make those EV cars. We're pushing EV cars, but we're shutting down the mines that make the elements to make those cars, making us more dependent on China. Does this seem backward to you? Does this seem something like something's going drastically wrong? A typical EV's 1,000-pound battery requires 25 pounds of lithium, 30 pounds of cobalt, which we just shut down the mines, 60 pounds of nickel, which we just shut down the mines, 90 pounds of copper, which we just shut down the mines, and 110 pounds of graphite, which, by the way, we shut down the mines. Naturally, China possesses and processes 60% of the Earth's lithium, 80% of its cobalt, 5% of its nickel, 43% of its copper, and up to 80% of its graphite. It's theoretically absurd for Democrats to seal the mines whose contents compose the EVs that they insist Americans purchase. Instead, to hand Red China a giant stick made of those materials and wait for it to blackmail the U.S. in either the nadir of boneheadedness or the zenith of self-sabotage. Let me go on a little bit further. That one makes me extremely upset because that could stop today. But Trump was doing it. He was trying to expatriate all kinds of companies back to America, and it was working. He was charging China huge tariffs on their goods, and it was working. And now we've gone the opposite direction. This is in moral decay. Young men suffer and no one cares. The concept of toxic masculinity has attracted much press in recent years. In some ways, men acting in ungodly ways have brought the label and condemnation on themselves. But our society tends to readily apply this label to any man who has confidence, goals, and ambitions, and is even remotely assertive. Young boys no longer aim for the milestone once expected of them, such as opportunity to graduate from school or earn a living and support a wife and family. Fewer fathers now live at home, and many young men cannot earn enough income even to live on their own. In the United Kingdom, 27% of 27-year-old men still live at home with their parents. It compares to only 13% of 27-year-old women. The sad truth is that few are concerned about this trend. And as men are imagined to be less and less relevant to society, women have skyrocketed to the fore and have in many ways been there for well over a decade. As far back as 2012, 12 out of our 15 of the top growing professions in the United States were dominated by women. We hear about these glass ceilings. There's no such thing. 12 out of 15 top growing professions in the United States dominated by women. Bible prophecy warns us that at the end of the age and as it approaches, men will be displaced as leaders of society. Let me quote it for you. As for my people, children are their oppressors, and women rule over them. Isaiah 3:12. This decline leads not only to a social role reversal, but also to the demise of the family as God created it. And obviously you've been following the devastating earthquake that hit Syria and Turkey. That's one of the pictures. But now there's some new reports coming out. The death toll from the devastating earthquake in Turkey and Syria has surpassed 37,000 people. If you can imagine that. 37,000 people. Tens of thousands of people are still missing. And social media feeds are awash with examples of newly built residential complexes that have collapsed like sandcastles, burying occupants under the rubble. Many of these buildings were sold as luxury housing, compliant with the latest earthquake safety standards, unquote. Some of the contractors responsible have tried to flee Turkey. Warrants have been issued for more than 130 contractors over alleged breaches of safety codes. And several construction company owners have been arrested. Turkey's Justice Minister, Bekik Bozag, vowed that all those who are at fault will be held accountable. But this kind of greed and blatant profiteering are not solitary crimes. These residential complexes could not have been built without state-issued building permits and licenses, without the approving signatures of nominally independent building contractors and inspectors, and without the necessary reports from laboratories doing quality control of construction materials. They could not have gone ahead without the government's many changes to construction and the government's approval. The earthquake is absolutely mind-boggling. This is a seismic monitor. As you see, the bright yellow and red that I'm showing in the upper left, that is the 7.8 earthquake that hit Turkey and Syria, followed by a 7.2, not trembler, not after effect, but another earthquake. You can see the ring of fire and the earthquakes that are happening. Jesus said in the last days that there would be earthquakes in many places. And in fact, we're watching it. I've told you this before, and I'll tell you again. We are in the last days. I don't know how many times I have to say it, but Americans just don't get it. I was talking to somebody who was unsaved the other day, and they were talking about all of the movies and all of the things about aliens, and asking me what I thought. Well, let me tell you what I think. They ruled out that the objects were not alien. Let me tell you something. One of these days, they're going to tell you the objects were, and that's the way they're going to convince people after the rapture happens. The undesirables have been taken away by aliens. You are living in the last days. It's a great time to look up because the Bible says our redemption draws nigh. We're going to take 1 minute as a break, and we'll come right back with the Gospel of John.